"You have 1 hour to gather everything and leave your desk," the director said, loud enough for the entire floor to hear, and when I looked around for help, every face I trusted was already turned away. My name is Marlo Reed. I had worked here for 5 years without a single warning. I was the quiet one who stayed late, fixed broken processes, and delivered clean numbers. That morning, in a Monday meeting, Calvin Rourke looked at me like I was a problem he had finally decided to erase. He said I showed gross incompetence. He didn't explain. He didn't have to. The room filled with whispers. I saw security near the door. I stood there, stunned, trying to understand how everything could fall apart in one sentence. I wanted someone to speak up. No one did. When I walked back to my desk, the clock on my screen felt loud. 60 minutes to pack my life into a box. As I cleared my drawers, small things started to bother me. Reports I had finalized that suddenly showed errors. Numbers that didn't look like mine. Emails I remembered approving that were no longer in my sent folder. And the promotion I had been promised last month, now handed to someone else without a word. This didn't feel like a mistake. It felt prepared. I carried my box past people who wouldn't meet my eyes. At the elevator, I stopped and looked back at the floor where I had given everything. I knew I hadn't failed. Someone had changed my work. Someone had fed Calvin a story. And someone close to me had helped make it believable. I walked out of the building, not knowing how yet, but knowing the truth was still there, waiting to be found. I sat in my car for a long time before I could drive. My hands were still shaking, but my mind would not rest. The more I replayed the last 3 months, the more wrong it felt. My reports had been clean. I checked every figure, every formula. I knew my work. But somewhere along the way, things changed. A projection I had finalized suddenly showed errors I never made. A cost column was off by just enough to look careless. I opened old backups on my laptop. My original files were different from what the company now had on record. Then I checked my email. Approval messages I clearly remembered sending were gone. Entire threads had vanished. It was as if parts of my work history had been erased. I thought about Evan Calder. He was my teammate, the one who always offered to double-check my numbers. I trusted him. I had shared access so he could help meet deadlines. He never seemed jealous. He never rushed. He just watched. I also thought about Naomi Pike in HR. Every time I asked about missing documents or odd review notes, she smiled and said, "It's all handled internally." I believed her. I wanted to believe the system worked. But sitting there, with proof on my own screen, I understood something that hurt more than being fired. I had not failed. My work had been changed. My record had been rewritten. The shock I felt in the meeting started to harden into something clearer. This was not an accident. Someone had moved pieces quietly while I was still doing my job. I wiped my eyes, closed my laptop, and took a breath. I was done asking what went wrong. Now I needed to know who made it happen, and why. I didn't know who else to trust, so I called Lydia Kane. She used to sit 2 rows behind me. A year ago, she was gone in a week. No goodbye email. No explanation. At the time, I told myself it wasn't my business. Now I understood it was exactly my business. Lydia answered quietly, like she expected my call. When I told her what happened, she didn't sound surprised. She said, "It started the same way for me." She explained that she had questioned some of Calvin Rourke's expense reports. Nothing dramatic, just numbers that didn't add up. A few weeks later, mistakes began appearing under her name. Meetings she was never invited to showed her as absent. HR told her it was being handled. Then one morning, she was asked to leave. "Rourke never acts alone," Lydia said. "He lets others take the fall when his decisions go bad. He uses people who are rising, people no one would suspect." Her words made my stomach turn. Then she said something that hurt more than anything else. "Who took your project?" I didn't want to answer, but I did. "Evan." Lydia went quiet for a second. "That's what I thought. He didn't just benefit from you leaving. He inherited everything you built. The visibility. The credit." I thought about how Evan had suddenly been praised in meetings. How he had always been close to Rourke. How he never once reached out after I was fired. What I believed was a personal failure started to look like a pattern. Lydia wasn't an exception. I wasn't either. I thanked her for telling me the truth. When the call ended, I sat there holding my phone, realizing something important. This wasn't just about what they did to me. This was how they operated. And I was done being another quiet name on their list. I decided to ask for everything in writing. I sent a formal request for my personnel file and the documents that explained why I was fired. I told myself that if this had been a mistake, the truth would be there on paper. Naomi Pike replied the next day. Her message was polite, soft, and empty. She said the file was being reviewed, and that these things take time. Days passed. When I followed up, she apologized and asked for patience. Her words sounded kind, but nothing moved forward. When the documents finally arrived, something felt wrong right away. The dates did not line up. There were meeting notes from days I was never invited to. A performance warning appeared in my file that I had never seen or signed. Even the timestamps on some reports didn't match when I had actually submitted them. I read everything twice. Then a third time. This was not confusion. This was construction. I called Naomi. I asked calmly about the warning I never received. She paused, then said, "These things are handled internally." It was the same sentence she had always used. Friendly. Firm. Final. For the first time, I heard what it really meant. HR was not there to protect me. They were there to protect the company. And now I saw that Naomi wasn't just standing by while others rewrote my record. She was helping make it official. The realization hurt more than losing my job. I had believed in the system. I had trusted that fairness lived somewhere in the process. But the file in my hands told a different story. This wasn't an error to fix. It was a story they had decided to tell about me. And I was the only one left who could challenge it. I heard it from someone who still worked there. A former colleague called me quietly and said, "You should know what's happening." She told me Evan was now leading my project. Not a new one. Mine. The same system I had built from scratch, the one I stayed late for, the one I was told would lead to my promotion. In meetings, Evan was calling it a recovery effort. He said he was fixing the mistakes I had left behind. He spoke calmly, like he had always been in charge. I felt something tighten in my chest. That night, I opened my old backups again. I checked the access logs. Evan's name was there, on folders I never gave him permission to edit. Admin access had been added under my account while I was still working there. Changes were made late at night, after I logged off. It wasn't just that he took my work. He had used my trust to do it. I remembered how he used to sit across from me, saying he wasn't interested in promotions. How he thanked me for teaching him. How he said he just wanted to support the team. I had believed him. I had shared files. I had let him review drafts. I had thought we were building something together. Now he was standing in front of executives, wearing my work like it was his own. Calvin might have signed the order. HR might have buried the proof. But Evan was the one who stepped into my place without hesitation. The betrayal stopped being abstract in that moment. It had a face, a voice, a name. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt clear. This wasn't about the company. This wasn't about policy. This was about someone who watched me work, took what I built, and helped erase me to claim it. And I was no longer willing to let him keep it. I went back to the one place they could not touch, my own files. Late that night, I opened an old external drive I had used for personal backups. I wasn't searching for proof anymore. I was searching for understanding. I needed to know how my clean work had become the story they used to destroy me. Buried in a folder I almost deleted was an early draft of an internal audit I had saved months before. It was incomplete, never submitted, just something I kept out of habit. I opened it without expecting much. What I saw made my breath stop. The numbers were different. Not small changes. Directional changes. In the original draft, the errors pointed upward, toward leadership decisions, toward budget approvals that traced directly to Calvin Rourke. In the final version stored on the company system, those same figures had been adjusted downward, shifted just enough to make it look like the fault was mine. It wasn't sloppy. It was deliberate. Someone had taken data that would have raised questions about Rourke and turned it into evidence against me. They didn't erase the truth. They buried it. I compared line after line. The pattern was clear. Every change protected the same person. For the first time since I was fired, I didn't feel lost. I felt focused. They had assumed I would walk away in shock, hurt, and silence. They didn't think I would still have pieces of the past they couldn't reach. They didn't think I would notice what was missing. But now I knew exactly what had happened. This wasn't chaos. It was design. And the truth was not gone. It was waiting in the spaces between versions, in the records they forgot I kept. I closed the file and sat back steady. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was planning. They had hidden the truth. I was about to bring it back. Lydia gave me a name and told me to be careful. I met the attorney in a small office far from downtown. I laid everything on the table. My original files, the altered versions, the access logs, the audit draft they thought was gone. I expected anger or shock. Instead, he listened quietly. When I finished, he said something I didn't expect. You don't need to expose them. You need leverage. He explained that what happened to me wasn't just unfair. It was risky for the company. Altered records, hidden approvals, manipulated audits. These things mattered in ways I hadn't fully understood. If the truth came out at the wrong moment, the consequences wouldn't be personal. They would be financial. That was when I learned what they were preparing for. The firm was moving toward an acquisition. A large one. And the deal depended on the accuracy of internal data, especially the projections I had built. The very numbers they used to fire me were now being presented as proof of stability. My work was holding up a multi-million-dollar agreement. The lie that destroyed my career was now supporting their future. I walked out of that meeting with a strange calm. For months, I had felt small, erased, powerless. But now I saw something different. I wasn't chasing revenge. I was holding the one piece they could not afford to lose. They believed the past was settled. They believed I was gone. They didn't know that the truth still existed in my hands, clean and unchanged. I didn't need to rush. I didn't need to shout. Timing was everything. And for the first time since that meeting where I was told to pack my desk, I understood this clearly. They had taken my job, but they had built their future on my work. And that meant the next move was mine. They called me 3 days later. Naomi's voice sounded different. Softer. Careful. She said they needed to clarify some inconsistencies in my past reports. Calvin framed everything as a misunderstanding. He said things had moved too fast, that mistakes happen. Evan never spoke to me at all. What they really wanted was simple. They wanted me to say the data was fine. I went back to the building I had been forced to leave. Same lobby. Same security desk. Same floor. But this time, people didn't look away. They watched me like I carried something dangerous. Naomi walked beside me, suddenly helpful, offering water, asking if I was doing okay. Calvin smiled too much. He said the company respected my work and just needed confirmation that the projections could still be trusted. He said it like he was doing me a favor. I looked around the meeting room. The chairs. The screen. The empty seat where I used to sit. Nothing had changed. Except everything had. They weren't asking for the truth. They were asking for my silence. If I said the numbers were sound, the deal could move forward. If I didn't, their plans could fall apart. I could see it in the way Naomi avoided my eyes. In the way Calvin kept repeating that we should put this behind us. Evan stayed quiet, staring at the table like I wasn't there. For a moment, I felt the old fear. The memory of being ordered out. Of carrying my box past people who wouldn't defend me. But I wasn't the same woman who left that day. I understood now what they needed from me. And I understood something even more important. They had brought me back not because they were sorry. They had brought me back because I held the truth they could not afford to lose. The door closed behind us. No windows. No audience. I placed my laptop on the table and opened the first file. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse anyone. I simply showed them what I had. Original reports. The versions I saved before anything was changed. Then the access logs, timestamps, usernames, edits made after I logged off. Evan's name appeared again and again. Files I never gave him permission to alter. Naomi leaned forward. Calvin crossed his arms. Next, I pulled up the email headers. Messages that had been lost from my account were still traceable in the system. The approvals existed. They just hadn't come from me. I showed how the forwarding paths had been rerouted. Evan's face went pale. Finally, I opened the audit draft. The one they didn't know I kept. Line by line, I compared it to the final version. The changes were clear. The errors had been moved away from leadership and redirected onto me. The authorization trail led straight to Calvin. No one spoke. I looked at Naomi and said calmly, "You told me everything was handled internally. Were you aware that HR approvals are attached to these changes?" She stared at the screen. I could see the moment she understood that her role was documented, not hidden. Evan started to talk, then stopped. His hands shook. Calvin finally raised his voice, asking what I wanted. I didn't answer that. Instead, I asked one simple question. If this data is submitted for the acquisition exactly as it is, I said, who will be responsible when the original records surface? The room went silent. No threats. No demands. Just the truth, laid out where they couldn't deny it. For the first time since I was fired, the power in that room was no longer theirs. It had quietly shifted to me. The weeks that followed were quiet, but everything changed. There were no public statements, no dramatic announcements, just meetings behind closed doors, an internal review, documents requested, questions that no one wanted to answer out loud. Calvin stopped coming to the office. Evan was removed from the project. Naomi sent one final email that sounded formal and careful, like someone writing for the record. They offered to reinstate me. The message said they wanted to correct the situation. They said my work had always been valued. They said mistakes had been made. I read it once. Then I closed my laptop. I didn't go back. What I did accept was what was fair. My name was cleared in writing. The record that had been built against me was corrected. A settlement followed, quiet and complete. Not a reward. Not an apology. Just the truth acknowledged and the damage repaired. One morning, I returned to the building for the last time. Same lobby. Same elevator. Same floor. I carried the same box I had taken out weeks earlier. But this time, no one looked away. No one whispered. They simply watched me pass, knowing what had happened, even if they would never say it. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel angry. I felt finished. I had walked in as someone they thought they could erase. I walked out as someone they could never deny. Revenge did not come with noise or celebration. It came with documents, with calm decisions, with control. I stepped outside into the light, set the box in my car, and closed the door. They had taken my job. They had tried to take my voice. But they never took who I was. And I didn't need their building, their titles, or their approval to know that I had already won. If this story moved you, remember this. Document everything, protect your work, and never assume systems are neutral. Power often hides in paperwork. If you faced workplace injustice, learn your rights, keep records, and seek professional advice. Truth, when prepared, is the strongest form of self-defense.